Turnkey on Queen City News Plus, your go-to show for everything real estate. We talk about the latest market trends, do's and don'ts of the industry, and provide expert advice on navigating this dynamic landscape that we call home. I'm your host and also real estate agent, Morgan Francis, and if you're a first-time home buyer out there, or maybe it's something that you're like, that is so far away from where I'm at right now, or maybe you think that's something that's just never going to be attainable for me. Wait, this is your episode. We're going to talk about everything that you need to know when you're looking at buying your first home. And to do that, we are going to bring in Derhyl Pruitt with the Pruitt Miller Realty Group.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Derhyl, we appreciate you coming in, and thanks for taking the time to come on Turnkey. You kind of your area of expertise is first-time home buyers.
Yeah, kind of accidentally got into that niche. Years ago, actually, it started during the Great Recession,
Yeah.
2009, 2010. And I happened to see a news report saying that the real estate market was going to be the worst that it had been since 2001. And I'm thinking, well, what was I doing in 2001? Because I wasn't
Right.
really familiar with that. And then it realized I was working with first-time home buyers at that point. And so I intentionally decided to target that niche to get us through that period of time, and it worked out perfectly. So it's kind of an accidental niche that I kind of backed into.
So 2008, everything hits the fan.
Right.
People aren't buying. People aren't able to sell.
Right.
That was a really difficult time. So how is it that you were able to work with first-time home buyers and not necessarily convince them to buy a home, right? That's got to be their decision,
Right.
but to convince them to be comfortable with it.
Well, I figured that as long as you had job security, you might be aware of what's going on in the economy overall. But if you've never owned a home and that's your dream to do so, that's not going to stop you.
Yeah.
So I kind of counted on that niche being pretty much resilient overall in the market. And because I had worked with a number of first-time buyer programs prior to that, through Charlotte Housing Authority, which really kind of got me into the real estate realm, I knew that as long as we had resources to help folks buy homes, and then during that period of time, there was a glut of homes on the market.
Right.
So there was a lot to choose from, and we just thrived in that market.
A lot to choose from, and a lot of people who are probably willing to make some sacrifices on the selling side in order to cut their losses and just part ways with the house. So there was probably a lot of opportunity for buyers as well, which once you kind of open up their eyes to that possibility, things change very quickly when you're looking at buying a home.
Yeah, actually, the problem was having too much, basically, information overload, because there
Right.
was so much to choose from. You had foreclosure
Mhm.
on the market. You had short sales on the market. You had distressed sellers who just needed to sell quickly on the market. So the buyers were definitely in the driver's seat.
Yeah. Well, we're starting to see that shift a little bit now,
hmm
but I don't think first-time home buyers or potential first-time home buyers feel like that's the case. Housing is still very expensive.
Yeah.
Nowadays, if you're a married couple, sometimes with a family, you need two incomes to make it work. That wasn't the case,
Yeah.
decades ago. So we are seeing a more balanced market, I think. Sellers are offering some concessions. Concessions are, when they say, okay, if you buy this house, I'll give you $10,000 that you can help buy down your interest rate for your mortgage. We'll get into that in a little bit. So we're seeing a little bit more of a balance, but overall, the prices are still high. So what information is out there for first-time home buyers? What options are available? And we actually have a graphic of some of those options that we can talk about. But what information is available for a first-time home buyer to feel comfortable again with jumping into the process?
Well, first of all, it's a very challenging market for entry-level buyers. It's totally different from the era that I was talking about 20 years ago, almost.
hmm
The biggest detriment is the cost of housing at this point. Um, we can help folks get funds for down payment. We can help folks have the monies up front for their expenses and closing costs. We can help folks with their credit. But at the same time, if your income is not keeping up with the rate of inflation and the rate of housing appreciation, that makes it very challenging. But I tell buyers, don't focus as much on the price of a home. Let's see how we can make that price fit within your budget. And there are several resources and strategies that we use to do that. Um, Rate buy downs, down payment assistance programs, specialized loans,
Mhm.
um, seller contributions,
Right.
family gifts.
Right.
And even though I don't really recommend it, you can even tap into a 401k fund that you might have.
There's a risk to that,
Yeah, there is a risk to
obviously.
that. Yeah. So
So
there are various ways to make something fit within
right,
that budget.
right. Let's say someone doesn't have a family member who wants
Hmm.
to just give them $20,000, $30,000. If you
Right.
do, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of people don't.
Yeah.
Um, Rate buy down.
Hmm.
What is that and how is that accomplished?
It's accomplished a number
And
of
I know
ways.
I'm gonna preface it with, I
Mhm.
know you're not a lender.
Right. Right. I get it. Yeah. So there are several methods to that. You can have a buyer funded buy down where the buyer brings in proceeds to buy the rate down. You can have a lender funded buy down, which typically would be a free buy down for that buyer. The lender puts up the funds. You can have a seller funded buy down
Mhm.
where they're providing concessions to buy the rate down. You can have a builder funded buy down if you do go with new construction, which there a lot of new build home builders are doing that these days in order to move their inventory.
Mhm.
Um,
So, how much are we talking? Let's say someone's like, "I wanna buy down my interest
mhm.
rate and lower my monthly
Yeah.
payment." Because in the beginning, you're paying mostly interest when you're making those payments, and at some point, the what they call the principal is
Mhm.
what goes towards your equity in your home, and the interest, they cross paths at some point.
Right, right, right.
A lot of times we don't get to that point because we sell the house.
Mm.
So you're mostly paying interest. But if someone's thinking, okay, what if a seller doesn't just hand over, I don't know, $10,000?
Okay.
What if I have to come up with that money myself? How do you calculate how much money is required to buy down your rate by whatever percent?
Well, that's a question that would be better responded to by a lender.
Lender.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they do the math and they know how the pricing of a loan is.
Right.
I would say that there are several lenders out here that will provide. They've got specialized loans to buy the rate down a point to a point and a half. Okay,
Mhm.
that's right off the bat.
Mhm.
You also have your adjusted rate mortgages. Well, I know a lot of people aren't crazy about that because you don't have that stability of the rate.
Right. Right.
However, I tell folks all the time that your first home should not be considered to be your forever home.
Mhm.
Okay, so what you want to do is be able to get into the home, live there for a few years, look
Mhm.
at it as an investment, and then down the road, when the rates come down, you can either refinance to a lower rate, fixed rate,
Mhm.
or you can sell the home, make a profit, and move to a home that's more in line with what you would like to have.
Right. Maybe it's your 5 to 10 year plan.
Right.
15 years if you're lucky.
Correct. Correct.
Like I said, most people don't get to the end of a 30-year mortgage, especially in their first home.
Yeah. So very few mortgages run the course of 30 years, either because they sell the home or they refinance the home,
Mhm.
the loan.
And you can roll over that equity into your next home,
Exactly.
and then all of a sudden you don't need such a huge down payment
Correct.
to save, for when you purchase your home.
Right.
So some of the other options for first-time home buyers, we talked about different buy down options. What is this 100% no money down? That sounds too good to be true,
Yeah.
Daryl.
Yeah. It's not, but I get that question all the time. Okay. What's the catch?
Mhm.
So there are several lenders, especially in recent years, that have come up with their own version of that. Okay. We've been using one particular version for years, for at least the last 10 to 12 years, and it's the best option out there that I'm aware of.
Mm.
Most of these options have limitations. They may restrict where you can live,
Mhm.
how much you can spend on a home, how much your income can be. So those things are limitations that might restrict a number of
Right.
folks. Our best option that we use has none of those restrictions. Has no income limits for an individual or family. You can purchase a home up to the conforming loan limit, which is $832,000. You have no down payment. You can finance the entire purchase price into that loan, and it has no PMI, private mortgage
Oh,
insurance.
okay.
Okay, so that's the option that we use quite frequently. for folks who meet that criteria and the qualifying standards.
So do you oftentimes see that the rate is the same if someone doesn't use this no money down? I mean, I'm still thinking I'm thinking what everyone else is thinking about
Yeah.
there. All right, Derhyl, what's the catch? There's got to
Okay.
be a trade-off, right?
There is a slight trade-off,
Okay.
okay? The interest rate is slightly higher than market rate,
Okay.
depending on the credit score. Now, you gotta have a minimum of 680 credit score,
Okay.
okay? The higher the credit score, the lower the difference in that rate to
Right.
market. Now, because the loan does not have PMI, which
Which
can
is huge. I
right,
mean,
that can
to
be
not have
several
that
hundreds.
monthly payment,
Right,
that's every single month that you're paying mortgage insurance
right.
because the lender is saying, well, you don't really have a whole lot of skin in the game. We're going to need some sort of security here. That's the PMI. That to put down no money and to not have PMI is a huge benefit.
Correct. So even though the interest rate might be slightly higher, the lack of PMI partially significantly offsets
Hmm.
that slightly higher interest
Okay.
rate. So that's the catch. But again, it's well worth it.
Well, you're getting your foot in the door, literally and
Yeah. Yeah.
figuratively. Assumable mortgages is next on this list. What's the big deal with those? Why are they so attractive? Why are they so unattractive at the same time?
Right. So assumable mortgages, first of all, you have to find them. You have to locate homes, identify homes that have assumable mortgage.
Hmm.
Okay. Secondly, if you can identify a certain small segment of homes, and I would say homes that might have been purchased within the last 3 years
Hmm.
with an assumable mortgage back when the rates were between 2.5% and 3.5% interest rate, that's an idea. That's a gold
I
mine.
tried.
Yeah.
I bought
Yeah.
a house in 2020 and I tried I said, can we get this assumable? And they were like, not a
Yeah.
chance.
Yeah. Well,
It's worth a shot.
every home doesn't have
Yeah.
them. But if you can identify that home that does have it, now the drawback to that is the buyer would have to have resources to cover the difference between the current
Hmm.
loan balance and the purchase price. Now,
Right.
again, that's why I say target homes that have been purchased 2 to 3 years.
Hmm.
So the current owner would not have as much equity built up in the home.
Hmm.
So then you're basically paying the difference between whatever the current market value is and their loan amount that they used that they got when they
Right.
purchased the
You're going
home
to
two or
need to
three years
bring
ago.
more money to the table, but the trade-off is you could get a really low interest
Yeah.
rate. Is it VA loans that are usually assumable? I'm trying to remember.
VA and FHA,
Okay.
basically government-backed
Yeah.
loans, so
Yeah.
USDA loans as well.
Okay. So, something to keep in mind, especially for the veterans out there. I mean, that is a huge benefit.
Mhm.
Veterans don't have to put any money down for a home, and if you can get an assumable mortgage, that's a huge benefit. Uh, where to shop?
Mm,
Everyone wants to live in well, I shouldn't say everyone, but I think there are a lot of people who want to live in the area where everything's happening. It's
right.
fun. There's a lot of action, especially if you're, in your 20s and you want to live around other people who are having a fun time. But if you want to buy a house, maybe that's your trade-off is maybe you can't live in the most popular side of town.
Well, in this market, yeah, you have to consider a series of trade-offs, okay? That old cliche, real estate is all about location, location, location.
Mhm.
So the median price of a home in Charlotte right now is $440,000. In Mecklenburg County, it's $469,000. However, if you are open to considering other surrounding areas, there are some areas that are much more affordable, almost half. And we're not talking about going very far out, but yeah, you would need to go outside of Mecklenburg County.
Mhm.
Gastonia is one of the cities, Kannapolis, Statesville, Salisbury, even Concord.
Mhm.
For instance, I would say Gastonia, their median price is $295,000. Now compare that to $440,000 in Charlotte, and Gastonia is only a 30-minute drive down I-85.
Right.
So again, it's not about looking at this as your forever home, but being able to find a home that's affordable, and then you could move on to something else in 5 to 10 years.
When you have that conversation with clients, are most of them open to shopping elsewhere, or do you find that most people are kind of stubborn and they're like, well, you know, my priority list is that I want to live here.
Mhm. Initially, yes, they are kind of hesitant about that. They'll push back a little bit. I've had that happen several times.
Mhm.
And so my response will be, okay, don't take my word for it. Just spend a Saturday or Sunday afternoon and drive down to that area.
Right.
I can give you some addresses just so that you can kind of explore different neighborhoods in that area and see for yourself
Hmm.
and draw your own conclusion. That happens to me quite frequently. I've recommended folks move to Denver and the quiet side of Lake Norman.
Yeah.
And they didn't do it, or they didn't want to do it. But then once they drove out to Denver, they came back and said, "Yeah, it's not bad," and they ended up buying down there.
Hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people have their ideas of what certain areas are, but if you haven't been there, you haven't spent some time in this, quaint little downtown area, depending on where it is, you just don't know. And it takes that's part of the research, right?
Yeah. And one other thing, if you absolutely just don't want to live outside of Charlotte, there are some avenues to that as well. If you purchase a home in certain low to moderate income census tracts or majority minority census tracts in Charlotte, many of those areas are gentrifying.
Mhm.
You can then qualify for various resources, specialized loans,
Right. Right.
things of that nature, and you can still live in Charlotte. But
And
again,
there are grants too.
right,
I
grant
know,
money.
I believe Bank of America's got one
Hmm.
where it's you get down payment assistance and closing cost
Right,
assistance,
if
and
you purchase.
it's like $17,000,
Yeah.
and there are some that I've seen that are in Dilworth
Hmm.
that qualify for that, and you got to if it's a condo or a townhome, you still have to pay attention to the HOA
Right.
because that's another added monthly expense, but there are homes, as to your point, that qualify for that, and it's not something to bat an eye at. I mean, the $17,000, that's a huge help, and it's a grant. It's not like you're paying it back. You mentioned that there are options if you wanna stay in Charlotte. Cheap homes exist,
Yeah.
but there is a trade-off. If you buy a home that is, let's just say 250 in Charlotte, you might fall through the floors.
Yeah. It's hard to find a quality home in
Yeah.
a quality area of town for much less than about 275, 250.
And then
Um,
you're competing with the people flipping homes as well,
exactly.
who are paying in cash.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the last thing you want too is to buy something that's just gonna you're pouring money into it constantly, and then you can't live in your home
Well,
freely and feel like you can still afford life.
Well, the system is kind of set up to protect home buyers, especially entry level buyers, from that. So, say for instance, if a house needs a roof,
Mhm.
many first time buyers qualify and use FHA financing. FHA may require that that house have a roof replacement or something of that nature. It has to be a habitable house. So even though it may be at a low price and it needs work, if it needs too much work, the buyer won't be able to get the financing for it anyway.
Well, I want to talk about kind of what is being done to help people. So this is brand new info that just came down. So there was overwhelming bipartisan support for the 21st Century Road to Housing Act. It is now headed to President Trump's desk for signature. And what is it? Well, it's meant to boost housing supply, speed up development, and expand access to home ownership, and also is going to modernize parts of the federal housing policy. So basically, easing zoning, kind of getting rid of some of those barriers for home builders to boost supply and hopefully help bring down some of the prices that people are seeing to get into housing for the first time. So there are a number of elements to this that are supposed to help first time home buyers. As with anything, there are drawbacks. Some think that maybe it'll discourage investors from building because there are some other parts to it that might do that. But um, I guess think of this as build homes faster, uh, fewer roadblocks for builders and making it easier for some people to buy homes. So there is some positivity, right? And
Yeah.
on top of some of the things, Daryl, that you've mentioned today, you know, our representatives they do realize that there's an issue here and they're trying to tackle it.
Exactly. So I was about to say, government does acknowledge that there is a problem that they need to address. Okay, you've covered pretty much the stipulations for that
Mhm.
very well. This is basically something that's hot off the presses within the last
Yeah.
couple of days. So people are still trying to kind of get a grasp of exactly what the details are with that
Mhm.
program. But you basically highlighted all the significant parts of it.
Do you think well, nothing's going to be immediate, right? That's
Hmm.
just not the
Exactly.
way the world works. So for someone who is like right now watching this program thinking maybe it's just too far away from me buying a house. Um, what should be their first step, at least to just see and try?
Well, you don't know what you don't know. So, give yourself credit, enough credit to actually be willing to take the first steps to explore that possibility. Even if you find out that you can't purchase right now, you might be able to get insight to where you're better positioned to purchase in another year or so,
Mhm.
even months, because again, real estate is cyclical. So, say for instance, you might feel that you're not in a position to do it right now, but what about towards the end of the year? That's when you get the best deals during the holidays and the first of the year. That's when the market slows down the most.
Mhm.
That's when sellers are most motivated to sell. That's when you can get some of the better
I
deals
mean,
there.
even right now, I think we're seeing a lot of advertisements from agents who are representing sellers saying, "Hey, my sellers are now offering $10,000." Seems to be kind of the number that everyone goes to,
Mhm.
but $10,000 concession, that's not something to bat an eye at. I mean, that's $10,000 that they're offering, um, on top of whatever price they sell the home for.
Yeah. And again, we work with a lender who's offering $20,000 in incentives, but also new home builders.
Mhm.
I'm seeing new home builders are slashing their prices right now to move inventory. They're offering all kinds of incentives, uh, huge price reductions, things of that nature. So that's another niche that you might want to consider.
So, there was, a number of months ago, all this hype about a 50-year mortgage. I don't know, it might sound nice. I don't know very many people who would suggest it because you're paying all this interest up front,
Mhm.
and you're not gaining equity in your home until, like, a decade or 2 into this mortgage. Um, in other countries, they have 15-year mortgages. Uh, the US, 30-year, which compared to other countries seems like a long time. There's also, I think, a 40-year option.
Right.
What should people know about that? Is that worth exploring?
The 50-year concept, that's a new concept that was just kind of brought up by
Floated
the
out
current.
there,
Right,
right.
right.
Let's see how the public
Don't
responds.
think that's going to gain much traction. A 40-year mortgage, they do exist, even though they're rare. But some lenders will offer
Mhm.
that. Okay, um, but I will say, yeah, you're going to pay a ton of interest on it if you hold on to that for a period of time. But again, look at it as in certain short windows. Even if you were to explore a 40-year mortgage, if you can find it, hold on to it until you can refinance in a year or
Mhm.
2 years or whatever.
Mhm.
At least that gets your foot in the door to
Okay.
home ownership, and then you can transition from that at the appropriate time.
So that's the goal more so with a 40-year, not to hang on to it
No,
to
no,
40
no.
years, but get your foot in the door and then see financially what, fancy footwork you can do to lower your payment and hopefully pay off the house sooner.
The key is to make it affordable to get your foot in the.
Mhm.
So, whatever that makes sense, that makes good economic and financial sense to do that. And if you're comfortable with it, that's what you can do. And look at it as a temporary solution until a more permanent solution comes along.
Daryl, I appreciate it. I know everyone's feeling the squeeze right
Yeah.
now, and hopefully we've provided some helpful information to ease everyone's mind out there and maybe just explore what purchasing their first home looks like. Right?
Yeah.
Knowledge is key. Is there
So,
anything that we've missed that you wanted to discuss?
I think we've covered a number of things: the down payment programs, the specialized loans, the rate buy downs. the gifts and so we've covered a gamut of things, but there's still a lot more options that are available out there. We try to tailor the solution to each individual because every situation is different. So it depends on how someone qualifies, what their qualifying factors are, and then we try to tailor that solution to their
Mhm.
individual situation.
I know, like, a lot of people I know who are looking for their home, first home, their heads are just spinning. Like, what is all this stuff? It's so much information, and, it is a lot to learn on the fly, and, I might be a little biased in saying you kinda need someone to guide you through that process. Some people like to do it on their own, and that's okay too, but it's a lot to try to understand for the biggest purchase of your life.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 26 years and there's still transactions.
Every
Yeah,
transaction.
every transaction is different. The rules are always changing.
Mhm.
And that's when you want to consult with an experienced realtor
Yeah.
to walk you through that process.
Well, Daryl, thank you for providing all of this insight for everyone, and I hope that it was an educational episode for everyone out there.
Thanks for having me.
And to everyone who is watching this episode of Turnkey, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.